Hello and welcome to this special edition of China Now. This week we bring you a full episode of China Now, China's most watched current affairs program, which originally aired on June 2nd, 2025. In this important conversation, Professor Zhang Weiwei, Dean of China Institute at the Fudan University, and former Foreign Minister of Singapore, George Yeo, delve into the state of China-U.S. relations in the wake of President Donald Trump's renewed tariffs and explore how these shifting dynamics could shape the future of the global order. I am Akiza Latifa, and you're right on time for the conversation. Let's get started.
There's a trial of strength going on between the US and China. This will be over a fairly long period of time, maybe another 20 years. So this tariff war is just one round. There'll be further rounds. It's important to maintain a perspective even as we are going through this current difficult period. And the reason is this: the US has been used to dominating the world for a long time. By the First World War, they were already the world's biggest economy. After the Second World War, they were 40% of global GDP. And many of the institutions under which trade was depoliticized, world finances were conducted, were really institutions established for the common good by the US. When the Soviet Union fell, the US became the sole superpower, and some American intellectuals described America as the new Rome. And it was the end of civilization. But during this period, China grew and grew. And by the turn of the millennium, the US increasingly saw China as a growing problem, as a growing challenge, that China could displace the US as global hegemon. It is natural. If we were American, we won't like this. If we were the West, we won't like this, because we are so used to dominating the world for so long. Now for another power to arise is unsettling. So we should not be surprised that in recent years, the Americans are reviewing the overall state of affairs. The global institutions, they no longer think in their own interests. So they de-emphasize the UN. They've pulled out from the WHO, from the climate treaty. The WTO, they have deliberately not appointed judges to make it ineffective. And they prefer now to deal with countries bilaterally. This world is the world we're entering. And the Trump administration recognizes that the US now operates in a multipolar world. This was not the case before. Under Biden, they thought they could still dominate the world by skillful alliances. But in the end, after Gaza, after the Ukraine war, and with the US deficit growing, it is quite clear that the US no longer has the strength, the relative strength, to maintain a unipolar world. In a sense, Trump is fast-forwarding the future. And China is receiving bipartisan attention. The anti-China feelings are very strong in the US. It is not an entirely bad thing that this trial of strength is in the economic sphere. Imagine if it were a trial of strength in the South China Sea or over Taiwan, on the Korean Peninsula. Such a trial of strength will be very tense and may lead to people dying. In a tariff war, it's only our pockets which are hurt. And I think we can manage that. Trump doesn't like war. That's very good. The Israelis want him to bomb Iran. He prefers negotiations. And if the Iranian leaders are wise, they will find a way to strike a compromise. Trump is trying to bring an end to the Ukraine war. And he just expressed a wish that China could play a helpful role. Well, maybe China could play a helpful role in one way or another. Maybe economically, maybe as peacekeepers, whatever. But on the tariff war, Trump's approach has been, I'm big, you are small, I bully you. I threaten I'll make you the 51st state. I'll take over the Panama Canal. I may use force in Greenland. Everybody is coming around to kiss my bottom. But then when he faces China, China says, no, why should I do that? He's not happy. But Trump has a clock ticking against him, which is the midterm elections. He was voted to make America great again. So there is a very important domestic agenda that he's got to satisfy. Reduce the trade deficit, control the borders, manage the drug problem, revive manufacturing, create a different spirit in America. To do that, he wants to bring down the value of the US dollar without the US dollar losing its dominant position in the world and without causing recession. He wants America to consume less and China to consume more. China doesn't want victory over the US. That's not China's wish. China's wish is, I don't want to be bullied. If we negotiate as equals, you'll find me forthcoming. But if you threaten me, I will stiffen up. Trump is dramatic. He's aggressive. But if you look at his core, he's actually very consistent. He doesn't like wars. He believes that business is important. He wants the US to be strong, which, if you're an American, you agree is a good objective. But he has this very aggressive, dramatic style of negotiation, which annoys people. And he's made so many enemies in the world. Well, but this is his problem. It's also an opportunity for China. I mean, the Europeans are very angry the way Trump, J.D. Vance, Secretary Rubio speak to them. So they deeply desire greater autonomy, greater agency, but it cannot be done overnight. And I believe they will want better relations with China. China should not make Europe beg for it. As China wants face from America, China, knowing that Europe is now in a difficult position, should give face to Europe and to encourage Europe to take a more intermediate position. China cannot make Europe turn against America. That is not possible because their relationship is sealed in blood, in values, and by civilization. But Europe has its own interests in the Middle East, in Africa, in international trade, in the international financial system. China should support the euro because the renminbi cannot replace the US dollar. But the euro can and should play a stronger role. There are many things China can do to bring Europe closer to China. And so to Japan and Korea, even India, Latin America, Africa, of course. And in a different session, we talk about how important China's relationship with ASEAN is. So there's opportunity in Trump. And many people may be surprised that I should say this, but Trump is non-ideological. He has a bottom line. You can negotiate with him. If you're talking to a protagonist who is ideological, you can't negotiate because what he wants is to change you, which of course is not possible. If we're able to do this, then we'll buy a few more years of peace. And in the meantime, the multipolar world crystallizes. Then we should everywhere build structures to create greater stability. Because even after this round, at some point in the future, with some future US administration, with a future generation of European leaders, there'll be tension again. Then there'll be a second round. And there could be a third round. But each has to be managed. And in the management of these relations, China as a growing power, with the largest population, and already the world's biggest economy in real terms, must play a thoughtful, a long-term role, knowing that long-term peace and stability in the world is good for everybody. If we can't do this, what becomes of humanity? I mean, China is going to put men on the moon. The US is going to put men on the moon. Others would also do the same. And technologically, it becomes easier and easier. We ask ourselves, if as different nations we go to the moon, do we have to carry weapons? not against aliens, but against one another. If we have to carry weapons, then it means that back on Earth, we have not been able to transcend the past. But if we are able to work towards cooperation, having a unity above our diversity, believing in fraternity despite our differences, then space is the last frontier for humanity, and not just for Americans or Elon Musk or for China or for India, but for all of us as human beings. This may sound idealistic, but if we don't pursue an ideal, if we remain cynical that human nature cannot change, then we can never shed the past and we'll commit the same mistakes again in this century. Thank you. I think China has to be very steady. So if the US is fooling around, then China should not move. When the US is steady, then China should move and be patient. Eventually, they will understand the part that they have to play. Trump does understand, although he may get it wrong initially. You take, say, Taiwan. Trump has been asked repeatedly about Taiwan. He avoids it because he knows Taiwan is very sensitive to China. If he wants an agreement with China, he cannot use Taiwan. So he stays away from Taiwan. So Trump, from these last few weeks, knows that if you push China, China will be very firm. But if you are soft, China will be soft. So it's not a bad thing. In a sense, both sides are learning about each other.
I want to ask Mr. Yeo. You mentioned in your speech that there may be a sustained trial of strength. What do you think the eventual outcome of this round of China-U.S. tariff face-off might look like? Any predictions?
As I said earlier, Trump needs an agreement some kind of an agreement to convince his base that MAGA is working and that therefore they should continue to vote Republican. If people feel the pain of higher prices and a sense that Trump is not succeeding, then by the time of the midterms, some seats will be lost. Then Trump will be in trouble for the second half of his administration.
I think we're at a rather unique phase in China-U.S. relations. In a sense, the U.S. needs to get used to a new approach, one defined by mutual respect and equal treatment, and by taking matters seriously. It's that simple. Indeed, honoring your words.
So China is much better prepared now for a confrontation. But China doesn't want a confrontation. China still wants negotiation. But to have negotiations, you must be prepared for a confrontation.
Mr. Yeo hails from Singapore, a very important country. We also have a particular interest in learning its perspectives on China, the U.S., and China-U.S. relations.
For us, when there's a problem between the US and China, it's like father and mother quarreling.
Really?
Yeah, we rather not get involved because it's no win. And what we want is for father and mother to make up. That's our preference. Why? Because economically, we are very dependent on both countries. Our financial system is an American-controlled financial system. Well, there's a lot of money for us, a lot of jobs. I was from the armed forces. And I used to buy aeroplanes and helicopters and missiles for our Air Force. And much of our equipment comes from America. So our defense also relies a lot on our relationship with America. So we cannot cut our links to America. But we cannot cut our links to China either. So if we are forced to take sides, we will say, 很麻烦, what do we do? So we try not to take sides, But if one day we have no choice, we must jump one side or the other because there's no more space. I would say if it's today, we may have to jump with America because that's our life. 20 years from now, I think we'll probably jump on China's side. Between now and then, we try to delay it for as long as possible. And our best strategy is to have an ASEAN position. Then all of us can go behind ASEAN, behind one position. And that is 700 million people. This is the reason why Singapore is such an ardent advocate of ASEAN solidarity, economically, politically, militarily.
Regional international organizations like this can play a significant role. During our visit to Serbia last March, I had an in-depth discussion with a scholar. When I asked what lessons, especially cautionary ones, could be drawn from Yugoslavia's dissolution, he offered a relevant example that just came to my mind. He said, had Tito lived longer, and had Yugoslavia joined the European Economic Community as a unified entity, its tragic fragmentation might have been avoided. Among ASEAN's 10 member states, complexities abound. Take Myanmar, embroiled in internal conflicts yet still part of ASEAN. Other members face similar tensions, but their ASEAN membership acts as a protective umbrella. Fragmentation would inflict massive collective damage. This reminds me, regional integration, especially for smaller states, creates a supranational framework that safeguards national interests and fosters common welfare.
Does the U.S. exert greater pressure on Singapore?
China has been very wise in telling ASEAN that China will never force ASEAN countries to choose. So now the Americans, when they visit ASEAN, they say we will never force anybody to choose publicly. But privately, they apply pressure. So we have to manage that. And, if it's too fundamental, then we will have to pay the price and say no. You remember many years ago, almost 30 years now, Singapore caned an American boy.
Yeah.
They were very angry.
就是鞭刑，
对对，
打那个美国孩子。
对，
The judge gave him 6 strokes. President Clinton appealed. So, okay, we reduced it to 4 strokes. But all the other young men also had the strokes reduced. But if we did not cane him at that time, the US will know that we are pushover. So we had to be firm. The result of that was the White House cold-shouldered my prime minister for 3 years. Okay, we paid that price. But we still maintain military relations, intelligence cooperation. I did not realize at that time that others were also looking. Indian diplomats told our diplomats, it says, if it were us, we would quietly send the boy home. When I came to China, I was surprised by how much Chinese admired little Singapore for daring to cane an American pico. We didn't expect this, and we didn't do it to earn the respect of China. So sometimes a small country has to do a difficult thing in order to win respect and to show that, hey, don't push us too much.
Indeed. So when we speak of a nation's size, whether large or small, that's one dimension. But the weight of its dignity operates on an entirely different plane. A tiny nation can possess outsized dignity. Singapore exemplifies this. Its steadfast adherence to principles commands universal respect. Even the United States, despite its strong disagreements, ultimately acknowledges Singapore's position.
But we can't do it too often.
Small nations can produce great statesmen, like Lee Kuan Yew. Not all his advice to China was perfect or immediately useful, but in hindsight, some proposals were remarkably far-sighted. During Hong Kong's handover, for instance, he had already advocated for promoting Mandarin and simplified Chinese characters. Having experienced British colonialism firsthand, he understood their tricks and knew how to counter them.
As we want to make full use of Mr. Yeo's presence, I'm keen to hear your perspective beyond China-U.S. relations. How do you assess future trajectories of pivotal players like Europe and Russia in the global landscape?
Much of the world doesn't understand what China's growth will mean for them. Let us take the example of electric vehicles. Chinese electric vehicles after COVID advanced so much. No one else can compete with Chinese companies. The motorcar industry is responsible for many jobs in many countries. So China's growth has created a political problem for many countries. And China must understand this. Because you say, well, I'm just competing. But people are affected. And when many people are affected, it becomes a political problem. And if China is not sensitive, it will lead to a problem in foreign relations. I believe China understands the world, understands America, understands ASEAN, understands India, more than the rest of the world understands China.
네.
And that's not good for China. So China must help the rest of the world understand China. So when the US cuts off links, stops sending students, when India cut off air links and stopped sending students, when European people avoid China, that's very bad because it will lead to misunderstanding. What is their fear? Their fear is that China is building up its strength and will one day threaten them. That is their fear. They may not always say it, but internally that's their fear. It's important that China addresses those fears and open up to them. For example, when I was a student in Cambridge, many years ago, all of us Singaporeans studying in England, during the summer, we bought a rail ticket, which is good for 1 month. And we can travel anywhere in Europe, free. And we went with a backpack, youth hostels. 18, 19, 20 years old, we looked at European societies and we learned. And we never forgot. Imagine if China were to say, okay, we have a fantastic rail system. You pay so many dollars, so many pounds, so many euros, and you can travel anywhere in China for 1 month. And we have youth hostels. And we teach you how to use WeChat or Alipay. And we provide translators here and there. The next time they read the newspaper and they say, oh, this is what's happening in Xinjiang, this is what's happening in Xianggang. They say, rubbish. I've been there. The reality is different from what you report. Then you begin to shift minds. And after 20, 30 years, there'll be a major change. China should think of a way of opening up to young people so that they will understand China in its reality, good and bad. Not all good, good and bad,
But real.
but real.
Citizens from many major countries can now visit China visa-free, with durations extending from 2 weeks to a month, which is highly beneficial. His suggestion is excellent. Leveraging our world-class high-speed rail network, we could create weekly or monthly passes for foreign students with creative packaging. Give it a catchy English name, like the Eurail Pass he mentioned, enabling seamless travel across China. Pair this with affordable hostels to offer budget travel options. Such initiatives would allow visitors to see more, experience more, while shaping perceptions of future generations. Former Foreign Minister Yeo had worked in the Ministry of Defense.
Is that so?
Under Trump, not likely, because Trump knows how sensitive Taiwan is to China. And he's not ideological about Taiwan. But what he was saying is, I respect you only as a customer. That was what he was saying to China. And that was a very good reply that he gave. But he cannot say it a second time. Whenever he's asked questions about Taiwan, he avoids it. So I don't think there'll be trouble over Taiwan. But people around him, they will try to poke China using Taiwan. So when they introduced this Taifang system to the Philippines, China is annoyed. China says this is very unfriendly. But to me, is it really that important? China has to protest, I have no doubts. You know, when the Americans had bases in Clark Field and in Subic Bay, this was before 1988. Each base was bigger than Singapore. They were gigantic bases. Aeroplanes, soldiers, fire trucks, kitchens, shops, bars, everything. Today, when the Filipinos talk about letting the Americans use bases, they're tiny little things. Strategically, a nuisance to China. Will it make a difference between war and peace? I don't think so. But China has to protest. So that's my response to our Cantonese friend comments.
I fully agree with this view. In reality, this cannot alter the strategic landscape. Indeed, overall, Trump has no intention of going to war. That's a fundamental assessment. Even from a military perspective, what the Philippines has agreed to allow the U.S. to deploy is nothing more than intermediate-range missiles and cruise missiles. The intermediate-range missiles might, at most, reach areas like Fujian in China, while the cruise missiles are likely aimed at controlling the Bashi Channel. They pose a threat, but in reality, they're of little practical use. I believe a single Type 055 destroyer of ours could handle them all, not to mention the many other means at our disposal. However, as Mr. Yang rightly pointed out, the purpose of these actions is simply to make you feel uncomfortable, to provoke protests. The more you protest, the more they escalate. But in reality, it achieves nothing substantial. The Americans know this. It's about putting you in an awkward position, creating a superficial sense of presence, and so on. From a military standpoint, it has no real effect.
But long term, China must know that the US wants to keep Taiwan separate for as long as possible, if possible forever. So they may say one China policy, but the actions are to keep Taiwan separate for as long as possible, because if Taiwan becomes a part of China, then strategically the US Indo-Pacific Command will find a different situation, and they don't want that. So China understands this. Trump may not play Taiwan, but someone after Trump may play Taiwan, and China has to prepare for all eventualities. It will be painful, but people will make adjustments. It will not be the end of the world. If you can't sell to America, you can sell to other countries. Of course, you lose a lot of business. And if China can buy more, they will help us. As I said earlier, markets have a way to adjust. And market adjustment can be very fast. Even Chinese companies will learn how to maybe become citizens of other countries in order to be localized and provide better access to certain markets. But in the meantime, it's good for China to move closer to Europe, to find a way to normalize relations with India, and to continue developing its links to Latin America and to Africa.
I sometimes feel that our Chinese viewers don't fully understand the predicament of small countries. If you put yourself in the shoes of a small country, you'll understand more easily. Because I've visited many small countries, all the countries surrounding China. Take Bhutan, for example. I was a translator then, accompanying Bhutan's foreign minister. When we picked him up at the airport, the motorcade passed Tiananmen Square. He said, "Can we stop for a moment?" So we stopped, and he got out, looked around, and was stunned. He said, "Our entire national population could fit in here. The scale of large and small countries is just different." Just now, Mr. Yo mentioned a detail about the American bases in the Philippines. 2 of them are even larger than Singapore. I know Singapore's ambassador to the UN, and he told me about 20 years ago that Singapore, on the surface, looks very developed with a high per capita GDP. But he said, we are walking on thin ice, 9/11, and this country would be gone. He really told me that at the time. So, the situation for small countries is extremely difficult. Kishore Mahbubani often says that you must understand that geopolitics and geoeconomics are very cruel. One wrong step, like Zelensky made for Ukraine, is beyond salvation. Truly beyond salvation. One bad move can lead to eternal regret.
So, on one hand, we need to understand and respect the difficult position of these smaller nations when they face the tariff war or other pressures. But on the other hand, if we have the opportunity to cooperate well with them, it offers them an additional choice to solve their problems. At least they won't be without options, and that's crucial. They'll have one, an extra choice, and that choice is China.
If at a time like this, China shows sympathy and makes an effort to help, this will be long remembered.
Yes, so we all share similar sentiments. The good deeds you do for others will be remembered and appreciated. This culture is prevalent throughout East Asia. Whether it's Islamic civilization or Confucian civilization, both have this cultural heritage. In East Asia, we have many cultural traditions in common.
It's a long history of complementary relations between Southeast Asia and China. Singapore is a small city-state. It has a very important location and it plays an important role in the regional economy. But it is a small city-state. So we cannot be emotional when we conduct our foreign affairs. Henry Kissinger described Singapore as being cold-blooded in his analysis of the world. We were under the British. Under the British, Singapore was a major military hub. And when the British pulled out from Singapore in 1968, their expenditure accounted for 20% of our GDP. It's a lot of money. Lee Kuan Yew immediately flew to London to persuade the British Prime Minister to delay the withdrawal for 3 years, 3 harvests. It was important to us. But Lee Kuan Yew knew at the time that the economic power was America. So he developed deep links to America. And our deep links to America enabled us to grow for 30 years at over 10% and made us a first world country. But he could see by the late 70s that China was beginning to stir. So when Deng Xiaoping visited Singapore in November 1978, Lee Kuan Yew went personally to the airport to receive him and later to send him off. And we began to develop our links to China. In other words, for Singapore, it is practical reality. Who can enable us to live, to make a livelihood? And in the coming world, we should be multipolar. Our best bet is to have strong links to all the major powers. And if any one of them tries to bully us, then we'll move closer to the others. We'll be diversified. That's our strategy.
I'd just like to add a point. I think this question is very good. From my own observation, what Mr. Yeo spoke about is that the Singaporean government is very clear-headed and extremely cautious on this issue, generally not taking sides and maintaining good relations with all parties. I fully understand that. However, if we look at the public sentiment, I believe the majority of people are cheering for China. Because, as you mentioned earlier, the U.S. is bullying, picking on the smaller ones, and is very arrogant. So, the world has suffered from America for a long time, and justice resides in the hearts of the people. If you just look at online comments, you can basically see it. Even on the government side, there's a distinction between public and non-public occasions. I think most of them are happy internally. It's just that some express it openly while others don't. That's my judgment.
Since Professor Zhang brought it up, I'd like to ask Mr. Yeo one last question. You mentioned in your earlier speech that China is very different from the United States. If China were to be the primary participant in constructing the international order, what kind of international order do you envision it would be like in the future? And how would it differ from the current U.S.-led international order?
I don't see China displacing the U.S. as a global leader. China doesn't want to be a global hegemon. China's approach towards foreign relations is not to change other people, but to work on common benefit. So even if the Chinese economy is very big, it'll be a multipolar world. The problem is the U.S. imagines that China would behave like a Western power when it becomes very big and strong. They are wrong. But sooner or later, they will understand this. What will happen to the US? No one knows. Some people think that the US is on the decline. Maybe. But maybe it can revive. It is possible. I'm in favor of the US reviving because I think it's good for the world. I studied in America. I did some of my military training there. My younger son had leukemia. He needed a bone marrow transplant. He went to an American hospital. It was a charity. In a private hospital, his treatment would have cost $1 million. We did not pay 1 cent. Not only that, when my wife and my children were in church, ordinary Americans collected money and pushed it into her hand. She said, I don't need the money. He said, no, it'll be useful to you. So she accepted it. So there's something generous among ordinary Americans. We may not be happy with the government, but Many of us who traveled there, who studied there, who worked there, have good stories to tell. If America declines rapidly, the world is destabilized and there'll be a lot of trouble for many years to come. If America recovers some of its self-confidence, I think it'll be a better world.
As we've always said on our show, we hope that one day the United States can return to a path of rational development and truly make more positive contributions to global development. That would be a much better future. So today, former Foreign Minister Yeo's visit has provided us with many insights into China-U.S. relations and the future of the world. I believe it carries both his wisdom and observations, as well as Singapore's perspective and vision. Therefore, I'm very grateful to Foreign Minister Yeo for being our guest. We also welcome you back to our program whenever you visit Shanghai again to share your new observations on the world and the future of ASEAN. Thank you for being our guest, and thank you, Professor Zhang, and our audience here. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
And to wrap up this week's edition of China Now, we head into the Thinkers Forum, where leading voices and scholars weigh in on the ideas shaping international affairs. In this episode, we hear from Dr. Enrique Dussel Peters, professor at the Graduate School of Economics at UNAM in Mexico. He shares his perspectives on the outcomes and significance of the fourth ministers' meeting of the China-CELAC Forum and what it means for China's evolving relationship with Latin America. Let's hear this submission.
I think it is important to remind you the importance of this CELAC institution. CELAC is again a group of 30 plus countries, Latin American and Caribbean countries. It does not include Canada and the United States, which is important. And this CELAC institution, a group that is called the China-CELAC Forum. So the China-CELAC Forum is the main institution and instrument for the cooperation between China and Latin America and the Caribbean since 2015. This year is the 10th year and the anniversary of this China-CELAC Forum. This ministerial meeting of the China-CELAC Forum took place this Tuesday. The concepts of this meeting was completely different than the executive orders and the harsh and unilateral threatening words continuously that we have been used since January 20th. So the basis for this meeting between Latin America and China is a recognition of equal partners, of solidarity, of multilateralism, etc., of reciprocity, which are all words that do not appear on any of the executive orders since January 20th. So China is showing that it can make a difference. We are not going to treat the rest of the world such as the United States, and with a group of very specific proposals, programs that are relevant for Latin America and the Caribbean. I've been many times, several dozens of times in China, also in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, etc. And I remember seeing a very bad environment in these bigger cities. And this has improved importantly. I remember around 10 years ago, there was this APEC meeting, and so Beijing closed most of the firms in Beijing and around Beijing, and many people talked about this APEC blue sky. Last time when I spent 6 months in 2022, I saw many APEC blue skies, no? So, which I couldn't see 15 or 20 years ago. No, I can remember a very bad environment. So China, without a doubt, has improved importantly the domestic environment. Again, there is much to do. And I think that in the cooperation between Latin America and China, in terms of investments and in terms of infrastructure, China's infrastructure projects in Latin American investments are becoming increasingly green, no, in non-fossil energy. And this is an important fact to be deepened in the future. No, I think that both Latin America and the Caribbean and China are interested in this South-South cooperation, and as a result of this meeting, ministerial meeting, Latin America is particularly interested, in cooperating in terms of infrastructure to improve the infrastructure of Latin America, to eradicate absolute poverty, such as China has been doing in the last decades, and to allow for investments and infrastructure projects to support and improve the environment. No? So I believe there is a huge potential between China and Latin America. And again, remember that China and Latin America have already been cooperating and deepening this cooperation for throughout the 21st century. It is not that cooperation or infrastructure projects will begin in 2025. If you go to the report of ECLAC, you will find more than 200 infrastructure projects by China and Latin America. So we will not start from zero. We already have a long, mature, and extensive relationship. No, if you look again at this report by ECLAC, no, you will find 9 proposals, and I don't want to repeat all the 9 proposals, but I would simply highlight 2 very relevant proposals. One is the enormous potential of Chinese tourism in Latin America and the Caribbean. I think there is a big interest in China on the Peruvian culture, on the Maya culture in Mexico. And so there is a huge potential. But again, if we want Chinese tourists to come to Mexico, to Peru, to Central America, to Brazil, we need an infrastructure, no? We need tourist agencies, we need people that speak Chinese, people that understand what Chinese tourists like to eat, like to see, like to drink, etc. We don't have today such a specialized infrastructure, and as we very well know, Chinese tourists are very different than Italian or Swiss or US American tourists. This is one topic where I believe, and as we highlight in this report, this is one topic where both parts should work immediately as soon as possible. And the second one is to the programs and efforts to improve the exchange of young people, no? Young people at schools, at universities, etc. They are going to be the future. We need massive visits of Chinese to Latin America, of Latin American to China by the tens of thousands. They will be the future of the relationship between Latin America and China. No? If a 10, 15-year-old student from China comes to Latin America or from Latin America to China, they will not forget such a trip and such an experience until the end of their life. No? Well, again, the United States is reacting too late to China's challenge, no? In terms of technology, innovation, R&D, as I highlighted a moment ago. So far, the reaction has been, in general, I do not want to see China in Latin America in my backyard. No? President Xi Jinping went last year to inaugurate the port of Chancay in Peru, no? Built by and owned by Costco. And the reaction of the United States, this has not happened yet, but I remind you, the reaction of some high-ranking officials in the US was, we are going to put tariffs of 60% on any good that goes through this Chinese port. This was the reaction, no? So I believe it is a very childish reaction, no, on such an important infrastructure investment, and not understanding the increasing presence of China in Latin America, and which has been going on for in the 21st century. Yes, it is possible that the reaction of the US regarding such a ministerial meeting will be violent. It will generate very negative reactions in the US. But again, the strategy of this CELAC meeting and the presence of 3 presidents of Latin America simply highlights that, for example, President Lula, as member of BRICS, visited first Russia, and then he spent several days in China. And I didn't hear any particular critique by the US, because the US cannot expect that Latin America will not speak with China if the US also speaks to China. I mean, the US had this meeting in Geneva, and I hope that these negotiations will go on. So what is the expectation? The US can speak with China, but nobody else can speak with China? That is very childish and very silly, no? But again, we are witnessing very erratic policies and executive orders. On Monday, President Trump says one thing, on Tuesday another, on Wednesday he forgets about everything, etc., etc. The world order and the hegemony of the world order today is shifting very, very quickly. No?
And that's a wrap for this week on China Now. Big thanks to our brilliant guest and to you for being part of the conversation. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and stay tuned. We've got more bold stories, sharp analysis, and big debates coming your way next week. Please remember to send in your comments, your thoughts, feedback, and suggestions through the email provided below. I am Akiza Latifa. Until next time, please stay connected, and we'll catch you same time right here on China Now.